you questioners, seekers of truth, pilgrims longing for sanctuary, travelers needing harbor from the storm. Welcome, you who seek spiritual and religious community for your children and grandchildren. You entrust your young people here, and we as a community commit to nurture and respect them. How do we make this tender place wider? How do we stretch into a bolder welcome, a radical generosity of the heart? Can we commit and recommit to being accountable to one another as an anti-racist, anti-oppressive community that centers marginalized voices, that listens to those voices, especially when what they are saying is hard to hear? Can we be willing to change? There is in this place the possibility of healing, of repair, of making things right within ourselves, between us, and with the wider world. There is this place, a possibility. I am Jen Mason, one of your worship associates, and I welcome you. Our service today reminds us that justice has been sought by many unsung heroes. The sweat of those who persisted in justice's name against hostility and adversity. The tears of those who struggled to build better lives for those in this life. The chance to stand up together to help remake the world to be more just. The freedom to choose one's own path to truth and to learn from the travelogues of others. Today's service brings back Kiya Heartwood, both our guest speaker and musician. She will take us back in history to tell us about two unsung heroes who diligently fought for justice and lost their lives doing so, and their families who found no justice for their murders. A chalice lit in our midst is a symbol of our liberal faith, a faith built on the foundation of freedom, reason, and tolerance, a faith sustained by acts of kindness and justice, a faith that visions a world flourishing with equality for all her people, a faith that demands the living out of goodness, a faith that requires thoughtfulness, a faith of wholeness. This tiny flame is the symbol of the spark of all this within each of us. Covenant is Latin for come together and means a solemn agreement or promise from the heart regarding a course of action between parties. Please recite with me our covenant. Love is the spirit of this church, and service is its law. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth and freedom, and to help one another.
We are going, heaven knows where we are going, but we know with it, and we will get there. Heaven knows how we will get there, but we know
This is what you shall do. Love the earth and sun and the animals. Despise riches. Give alms to everyone that asks. Stand up for the stupid and crazy. Devote your income and labor to others. Hate tyrants. Argue not concerning God. Have patience and indulgence toward the people. Take off your hat to nothing known or unknown, or to any man or number of men. Go freely with powerful, uneducated persons, and with the young, and with the mothers of families. Read these leaves in the open air every season of every year of your life. Re-examine all you have been told at school or church or in any book. Dismiss whatever insults your own soul, and your very flesh shall be a great poem, and have the richest fluency, not only in its words, but in the silent lines of its lips and face, and between the lashes of your eyes, and in every motion and joint of your body. Walt Whitman. I want to honor some justice warriors that we should be very, very proud of, that are members of our heritage as Unitarian Universalists. And the story begins with 3 marches in Selma, Alabama in 1965. Selma had a population that was half black, but only 1 to 2% were registered to vote. So in the 50s, really draconian laws on the books, like 4-page forms that you had to fill out and to answer all these questions about the Constitution or how many judges there were in Alabama. The voter registration office was only open 2 to 3 days a month, and you had to have someone who was already on the rolls vouch for you. So no black citizens were finding that easy. They were, their names were put in the paper. They were harassed by the Klan. It was not a pleasant situation, and it took a lot of guts to even go into the office. So that's what they started with, and the local people brought in SNCC, which were the Students' Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, and the representative included a young man that you may know, John Lewis. John Lewis was one of the original 13 Freedom Riders, and John Lewis was a minister, and he'd gone to school at Fisk in Nashville, and he'd been involved in the demonstrations at the lunch counters there. And he was an experienced operator, and he was very dedicated to the movement. He had met Dr. King when he was 18, just starting college. So for 2 years, SNCC and the local organizers had been trying to get a voter registration in the Dallas County, which Selma was the county seat of. It wasn't going that well. And they came onto the radar of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, SCLC, that Dr. King was the leader of. The first march is led by John Lewis and the local organizers, and they walk across the Edmund Pettus Bridge, and on the other side of the bridge are the state troopers and the county deputies and a lot of posse men who are basically deputized people, some on horseback, some with whips, who attacked the marchers. There were about 600 people. 50 of them ended up in the hospital, including John Lewis, who had a skull fracture. They knocked people unconscious. Now, the thing that made the difference in this is that they broke into the nightly news. They were showing a movie about Nuremberg, and they broke in and showed film of these peaceful demonstrators being attacked. Millions of people saw this in black and white all over the country. Well, the Southern Christian Leadership Conference comes in after the March 7th demonstration, the Bloody Sunday demonstration. Dr. King sends out a message for all social justice people and clergy from all different backgrounds to come to Selma. So from being a 600 Bloody Sunday march, it grew to be a 3,000 led by Dr. King and many famous people, including a young minister named James Reeb, who was often called Jim, who's born January 1st, 1927. He originally was born in Kansas, and he grew up and was in the Army briefly. He served in Alaska, and he had gone to seminary to be a Presbyterian minister at Princeton. His ideas started growing in a Unitarian Universalist direction, and he changed his affiliation. He spent 3 years as a pastor at All Souls in D.C., and there is a podcast where you can listen to him actually giving his last sermon there. He was a member of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, and so he went to Selma pretty early on. He felt really strongly that he should go. His wife, Marie, stayed home with their 4 kids. He didn't blink. He went. He had tried to get more involved in social justice. He had done some work for the YMCA early in his career, and he had gotten involved in DC with civil rights, and he wanted to do more. So he quit his job at DC and moved to Boston so that he could be more involved in the Friends Service Committee for the Quakers and being more active in his social justice. Now, 3 minister friends that night went to get some dinner at a black cafe in town, and they were going, after dinner, they were going to walk back to the chapel where Dr. King was going to speak that night. Well, on their way back to the chapel, they were accosted by 4 Klansmen who snuck up behind them and hit Jim Reeb in the head. They called an ambulance, and there was no neurosurgeon in Selma, so they had to take him to Birmingham. They had a flat on the way. It was a very complicated thing, but he lost consciousness and died 2 days later. Little notice had been taken of Jimmy Lee Jackson's death, being an African American, but Reeb's death resulted in a national outcry against the activities of white racists and the Klan, in particular in the Deep South. There were vigils all over the country in his memory. March 15th, Lyndon Johnson evoked Reeb's memory as he delivered a draft of the Voting Rights Act. There was also this gaslighting thing that went on with the segregationists, saying that the civil rights activists needed a martyr, and that they either killed James Reeb or they allowed him to die. And there was the sheriff in the town wrote a letter that said that Reeb was a so-called minister, and he died after being, quote, thrown out of one beer joint and then coming out of another when he and his companions had a fight and were beaten by some men. So to this day, there's a great deal of false information and conspiracy. They were outsiders in a town that closed ranks. And even though they reopened the case 46 years later, it still remains unsolved. Viola Favre Gregg Liuzzo, and she was born April 11th, 1925, and she dies March 25th, 1965. She was the 39-year-old mother of 5. She had been born in Pennsylvania. Her father was Scotch-Irish, Native American, Appalachian, was a mine worker, and he lost his hand in an accident. So they knew her mother was a teacher. They lived in Tennessee and Georgia and other parts of the South. They didn't have a lot of money. They had a lot of racial segregation, discrimination. She was always concerned about other people. Viola moved to Detroit to look for war work, and she worked in a cafeteria. After she got married at 16, she met this woman named Sarah Evans, who was a Black woman who became her closest friend. And they had a lot in common, including a childhood in the South. And Viola gave birth to 2 daughters, Penny and Evangeline Mary, in 1946 and 47. And Evans cared for the girls while Viola worked as a waitress. 1949, George and Viola divorced, and 2 years later she married Anthony James Liuzzo, who was a union organizer for the Teamsters. And they had 3 children. Tommy, born in 1951, Anthony Jr. in 1955, and Sally in 1958. So Jim legally adopted Penny and Mary. Sarah Evans kept working for the family as a full-time nanny and housekeeper. Liuzzo had been a high school dropout, and she decided in 1963 to further her education, so she enrolled in classes at Wayne State University. And she was involved in education and economic justice things. She twice was arrested and pleaded guilty and insisted on a trial to publicize the causes, which she was an activist. So she was an activist way before that, and even as a mom. And she attended the First Unitarian Universalist Church of Detroit. Through Sarah, she got involved in the Detroit chapter of the NAACP. They drove, Sarah and she drove to New York City to attend a United Nations seminar on civil rights sponsored by the Unitarian Universalist Association. At the First Unitarian Church, she found a faith that had the social justice, social gospel kind of theology that she believed in, the activism that she believed in, and the religious questioning that she had found. She became a member of the church in March of 1964, and there were a lot of freedom riders in her congregation. She saw all that, the Bloody Sunday on TV, and so on March 8th, she decided she was going to go to Selma. Also attended the memorial at First Unitarian for Reverend Reeb. She drove her car. It took 3 days to get there at the Brown African Methodist Episcopal Church, the Brown Chapel, and volunteered to work with the SCLC. She served at the hospitality desk, and she helped at the first aid desk, and she drove people back and forth with her car. She volunteered her car, and she took people to the airport and to the marchers' campsite and back and forth between Selma and Montgomery. On March 24th, she stayed overnight at St. Jude's, which was a Catholic church, hospital, and school that was housing a lot of the marchers just inside the Montgomery city limits. And she saw 25,000 marchers marching toward them that attended the Montgomery rally where Dr. King spoke. She ran into one of the priests, Timothy Deasy, and said, "Father, I have a feeling of apprehension. Something is going to happen today, and someone is going to get killed." A taken 19-year-old Leroy Moten, after they had dropped 5 passengers off in Selma, they were driving back to Montgomery, and they pulled up on the Pettus Bridge, and next to them was a car full of Klansmen who followed them for 20 miles. When one of the Klansmen shot through Viola's window, killing her instantly with 2 shots. The car swerved off the road and hit a barbed wire fence. And he wasn't injured, but he was covered in blood. And so when he realized she was dead, he played dead. And the Klansman came up and checked with a flashlight to see if anyone had survived. And so he lived to tell the tale, and now he's a grandfather. There's interviews out there with him. Now, what's really disturbing about Viola's death is that there was a FBI informant in the car. And so the names of the men who shot her were released pretty quickly, and they were arrested. But the FBI informant had been involved in the shooting, and he didn't do anything to stop the shooting. And so J. Edgar Hoover thought that it would embarrass the FBI. So he started a smear campaign against Viola. So they said that she was down there having sex with black men, and that she was a drug addict, and that she had needle marks on her arm, and that she had abandoned her children, which is not the story that the children tell. And so her reputation was ruined. The Women's Home Journal had a survey not too long after her death about whether or not they thought she should have gone to Selma, or should she have stayed home with her kids. And the women all voted that she should have stayed home with her kids. So I think it was triply difficult for her family. Her youngest daughter was 6 at the time. The Klan burned a cross in their yard about 2 weeks after their mother had died. Rocks were thrown at the girls at school. They became a target of segregationists throughout the country. So they really suffered on her behalf. I think she's underreported. We as Unitarian Universalists really need to know who our forefathers are, and our foremothers who represented us and were warriors for justice. I think their lives are equally, if not more important than their martyrdom. We're still fighting these wars now. Don't lose heart. Do what you can. Thank you. This song's called Bold Swimmer.
Now the hungry ghosts are waiting at the table for a feast. We like the way our visions taste. Our dreams are oh so sweet, and we will walk like giants. We will take a stand. I will be a bold swimmer, reaching for the promised land. Now I drove across this country. I was sleeping at the wheel, searching for a better map and mysteries revealed. But the wind blew down the canyons, the sermons never cease. I must be my own salvation, I must be my only priest. Change and traders read their stories, always stay the same. The blood that's spilled is never quite their fault. And when we see the damage done, the friendship lost, the smoking guns, will we just turn away? Will we just turn away? I was standing at the crossroads. I was there to make a deal. The offer was most generous, all sleek and cold as steel. But I burned down my ambition, I turned on my own greed. I have everything I want here, I have everything I need. Times may change and traders read their stories, always stay the same. The blood that's spilled is never quite the smoking guns. Will we just turn away? Will we just turn away? Now my love and I are waiting at the table for a feast. We like the way our visions taste, our dreams are oh so sweet. And we will walk like giants, we will take a stand. We will be bold swimmers, reaching for the promised land.
Our Share the Plate for this month honors and supports the Human Rights Initiative of North Texas. Human Rights Initiative provides free legal services to people who have suffered human right abuses. They represent immigrants who have been victims of violence because of their religious or political beliefs and apply for asylum in the United States. They also handle matters under the Violence Against Women Act and help immigrant children who are victims of violent crimes, neglect, abuse, or abandonment, and human trafficking victims. The offering that we take each Sunday isn't just a stale habit, it's an opportunity to recommit to this place and to this people. Our offering is an affirmation, a yes. When we give, we say yes to something we value. With our gifts freely given, may we say yes to the values of our faith. May our offering help us practice Unitarian Universalism within and beyond our congregation as tools to empower our mission. You may donate by mailing to our address listed on our website, making a pledge if you have not yet done so, or just click on the blue donate button located on our homepage. Thank you.
Remember the way of the wind, and breathe and blow. Remember the way of the fire, sparkle and glitter and glow. Remember the way of the water, and ebb and flow. Remember the way of the earth, and grow. Go in peace.